want a good publisher who. Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that was begun during the pandemic to help independent bookstores whose doors were shuttered, to help authors whose tours were canceled, like mine was, and also to help readers get in contact with new writers or writers who they love and get a chance to talk to them. So today is really special because we're celebrating the paperback of one of my favorite books of the year, and not just one of my favorite books of the year. People magazine made it book of the week and called it witty, startling, astute. Good Morning America said it was 15 books to curl up with this November. LA Times said a novel of ideas. Chicago Review of Books said captivating. Kirkus, who hates everything, said it was smart and sophisticated. And Booklist Star Review said it was irresistible. Carrie the Dog. Here is the paperback edition of this book, and it is truly, truly remarkable. And it's by Stephanie Gangi, who is here with us. Hi, Steph. Thanks for being
Hi,
here.
Caroline.
Stephanie Gangi is a writer, poet, essayist, and a knockout novelist, editor, and best of all, she's a beloved friend of mine. She's the author of The Next, which is just an astonishing, great debut, and Carrie the Dog, which is, it's truly, as I said before, it's one of my most favorite books of the year. So this book is about Bea Seger, who's in her 60s. She's the daughter of a famous photographer who published sexualized images of Bea and her twin brother. But Bea is now dealing with the fallout of this. And the book really is an investigation of aging, privacy, art. What do we owe others? What do we owe ourselves? What's the truth? And I just have a whole lot of questions about it. So the first thing I want to know is, everybody on the planet loves the character of Bea. She's funny, she's smart, she's vulnerable, she's older without being, old. She's what everybody wants to be. Also, she re-examines her life. And I wanted to know, where did she come from? How did you go about, was she just alive on the page as soon as you wrote her, or how did this come from?
So I know a lot of women my age. I'm 66, and I don't know any women in their 60s who seem old to me
Mhm.
the way my mother and her friends and sisters seemed old way back when.
Right.
So I was very interested in the idea of rock and roll growing up. Rock and roll itself, growing up and growing older. You see older, you see Mick Jagger or, anybody, you name it, on the screen, and you think, how is it possible that this person is so old? But that rock and roll spirit still kind of lives on. And so I really wanted to examine a woman who has that rock and roll spirit and doesn't feel old on the inside and is trying to negotiate the mirror self and the inside self, because she still feels young. And I think a lot of us after the age of 60 still feel like we're in our 30s.
Right.
And so I really wanted to try to capture that very interesting and I think hard to grasp dynamic. I think the media makes it seem like you hit a certain age and then you're just old, and it doesn't feel like that in real life.
Yeah, I want to talk about the rock and roll stuff because I remember, like, when we were both early writing our novels,
Yeah.
and I said, well, I have like this aging rock and roller, and you said, I do too. And we talked about that, but it is something very different. I mean, my son, who is 26, pointed out a video of Mick Jagger, who is what, 80? And he was dancing after
Yeah.
heart surgery. And you look at him and you think, all the old rules and lies about
Yeah.
aging are wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
look at Paul McCartney. He's
Yeah.
still up
Yeah.
there. And you're right, with our mothers. I mean, I think in our generation that our mothers were old at 40. I mean,
Absolutely.
they really were. And 40 now, at least to me, is a baby.
Yeah.
I feel it's totally a baby. So I wanted to also ask, because it's such a strange process to go from an acclaimed hardback to an acclaimed paperback. It's the same book, but it's different. It's got a new cover with a new feeling. I should have brought out the hardback, which I have. If you have it, can you show it? There's
I'm in
additions.
another room. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So there's, there's definitely the addition of more hype, more
Yeah,
reviews,
yeah.
more everything. So I wanted to know, what's the process like for you and how difficult is it to keep writing while a new book while promoting while promoting Carrie the Dog?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I've struggled myself, and maybe you have too, with the two hats of being a writer and an author,
Yeah.
right? That you're in a dark hole for years writing, and then all of a sudden you have to, start tap dancing through. And I think the paperback is another phase of that exact thing, where I have to be talking about it again. I'm so deeply into my third novel that I actually had to go, when the day before the book was launched, I had to kind of review it and
Right.
kind of reread sections in particular that readers have loved. So that was nice, and it is lovely to have promo now, because when I post something or put something out, there are lots and lots and lots of people who've already read it. So in the hardcover edition, people haven't quite read it yet. And so it's exciting, but now people have read it and they're actually engaging and being very descriptive and literal about what they love about it. So that's great. I've enjoyed that. I actually didn't expect that this time because of the pandemic, and I didn't tour either. But it's been great to have people loving the book and telling me why. That's been
I
really.
know. But don't you also feel that it's almost like people coming up to you excitedly talking to you about your daughters when they were 5 years old? It's what you really want to talk about is them now.
Yes.
It's just a really interesting process, though. It certainly is great when a book has a long life and long
Yeah.
legs, and Carrie
Yeah.
the Dog definitely does. So while you're thinking and talking about Carrie the Dog now, does it still feel like your book, or has it left your mind? And is there anything that you would have changed when you look at it now, and now that the world has changed?
Oh, that is such a good question. I don't think there's anything I would have changed. I mean, there are some tough topics in the book. And if I've had any, not even negative feedback, more like neutral feedback, it's been that some readers have had to grapple with some tougher themes in the book, like the nude pictures and, of children, which are by no means is it graphic at all in the book.
No.
It's very subtle. Yeah, very subtle. But I did take a breath and think, should I have not written about that?
Oh,
But
no, you should
glad
have.
I did. Yeah, I would have stuck with that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
I
no, I
mean,
don't think I'd change anything. I mean, I love that you pointed out how different the cover is from the
oh,
first
yeah,
cover
let's,
was
oh,
quiet. Yeah, the first cover was pretty quiet, and this one is not quiet, and people are loving the cover. So that makes me happy. I've heard it jumped off the shelves at a local store on the other side of
that's great. Yeah, you don't often see purple books, but I think
yeah,
it's important for readers out there to know that paperback marketing is very different than hardback.
yeah,
They always change the cover, and
yeah,
covers are marketing decisions, and they're very, very important. And a lot of times, the salespeople and the marketing people will say, "This is a cover that shouts." People are going to stop because they're going to. There's all these elements going on. There's the woman's face. There's the
yeah,
white type, which is sort of scribbled in,
yeah,
and there's the purple, which draws you
yeah,
in.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a whole interesting thing
yeah,
to think about and
yeah,
to look
compelling.
about. So I want to talk about, since you brought out, the tougher things talking about, which are the sexualized images. You know, it's kind of the whole thing about photography to me is that photographs can lie, or they can
Absolutely.
tell the truth, or they can tell a deeper truth. And there's Bea was pretty much viewed as an object by her mother, who used her in the photographs, not as a human being. It's like separation. It's almost like,
Yes.
we're talking about marketing a book, which
Yeah.
is said the book is an object. But being viewed as an object is often the plight of women, especially really young women. And I think that Bea's trying to probe for answers about why her mothers did what she did comes counterpoint to the others in the book who have their own agenda. There's a movie producer because
Yeah.
this would make a great salacious movie. There's
Right.
a museum who also has their own agenda about who they think Bea was.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know if you could talk about that a little bit in terms of how can we ever know another person, and how can we try to not let others present us in ways that we don't want to be presented? I mean, especially as an author.
Yeah. I, first of all, love how much you know about my book. 'Cause you're
I love this
a good
book. I love
reader.
this book.
You're a
I love
good
this book.
reader, Caroline. I myself personally, in my personal life, I hate when people characterize me, and I try not to characterize people. So that is that is a theme I haven't really talked about, but it was a conscious thing when I wrote this book, that I wanted Bea to continue to subvert not other people's expectations of who she was, but her own expectations of who she is.
Right.
Because I do think when you hit age 60 or so and you start to take stock of a life, you realize that you need to embrace all of yourselves instead of trying to battle the selves you were that maybe made the wrong choices or
Right.
weren't good decision makers. That those selves are still who you are. You've
Right.
just added layers. So
Right.
I don't like easy answers or, facile characterizations of people. I'm not that way, and I don't assume other people are that way. So that is again a theme I haven't really talked about in this book, but that was certainly something I set out to do, which is a woman on a journey to kind of meet and embrace her old selves all along the way and bring that
Right.
momentum into old age.
Right.
Because how
Right.
else do you figure it out? How do you know what to do unless you marshal your strengths from the past and know your weaknesses?
I think what you just said is really important in that word "figure it out" because it never stops. It's not like, I mean, my mother-in-law was still figuring it out at 100 in a
Absolutely.
retirement home, and my mom fell in love at 94 and
Yes.
still figured it out. And I
Right.
think there's sort of a drive to be authentic, and it's sort of like when you're an author, you have a public persona and you have the private persona,
Yeah.
but why can't they be sort of integrated
Yeah.
more? I guess is the question I'm always asking. Like, why can't you just put that self on the page also? I
Yeah.
mean, it's really sort of a difficult thing.
Well,
Um,
just to jump in for 1 second, I'm not, it's not a spoiler to give away, but the last 3 words of the book are basically my entire aging philosophy, which is, I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know. And that's not a negative thing. That's a beautiful thing, to be able to reach a certain age and be okay with what you don't know and continuously be curious and not feel attacked when you're challenged. I mean, that
right.
to me is lovely. And so B is challenged all along the way. And one of the things I'm proudest of in this book is that she continues to pivot. She sees her assumptions when they're wrong, and she tries. She's not always successful. She flops and stumbles a million times, but she's trying to do better.
But that's what's so beautiful about her. She's not curated. You know, there's so I just saw something in the New York Times this weekend about having to do with being curated, about all these, they called it bro, all this bro culture going back to work on Wall Street,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
how they're curating a new image, and their new image is exactly like the old image, except they're not wearing ties,
yeah,
or they're not wearing suit jackets.
yeah,
And the whole idea of not having to curate who you are and to go against people's expectations. I personally think that the pandemic helped to shake a lot of that up. Would you agree? Did the
yeah.
pandemic, can you talk about how the pandemic changed and is still like changing things for you as both a writer and a person?
Yeah, I enjoy. not that I enjoyed the pandemic, but I liked not having to, I liked being able to be an introvert without
Mhm.
having excuses about it. So that part I enjoyed. But, I kind of feel like during the pandemic, all of my assumptions about institutions and government and everything kind of just started to crack. And
Mhm.
even, community and solidarity and patriotism and other Americans, it was starting to crumble after 2016, and now the pandemic just kicked all that into high gear.
I know. It's just, that thing that you said about, we want to the pandemic really messed everything up in terms of you really thought, or at least I really had to think, well, who do I want to be and who am I? When I
Yeah,
first started touring, I had to have the right outfit and I had to have all these talismans and I was all scared. And now I
yeah,
just, I am who I am. I'm usually going to
yes,
be wearing a t-shirt and jeans if I'm
absolutely,
ever
yeah,
touring again, that's what I'm
yeah,
wearing. But there's that pull to want to know who you are authentically, your true self, and to want to know others authentically. And I have noticed after the pandemic, and it took me a really long time, that I've stopped really caring what others think about me.
yeah,
Think about me. Have you found the same thing? I
yeah, but
mean,
I was like that before the pandemic.
oh, you were? Oh, I wish you had taught me how you did that.
Yeah, I am pretty much traveling my lane, with friends and family, and really, not really thinking about what other people are thinking about me.
Well, I think that's a great way to be. So and I think that's the way B is. So what is B doing now? Where is she
Oh,
now? If you imagine her right now in the present, and will she have lunch with us?
she's managing young artists and
I love that's right. That's right.
young
I forgot
musicians.
about that. That's right. That's another question. Okay. That's right. Let's talk about that. B at the end of the book, B is mentoring a younger artist. Let's talk about that whole thing about mentoring. Have you been mentored yourself throughout your career and do you mentor? You haven't? That is
No,
terrible.
it
That
is
is
terrible,
that is
and I
terrible.
do a lot of mentoring.
Mhm.
And even when I have 2 daughters, even when my daughters were little, my house was the hub for their friends. And I've always had their friends and, my younger cousins and kind of revolving around me. And now I'm translating that superpower,
Right.
um, into my writing practice. I do a lot of editing and I work with young women all the time, not exclusively young women, but certainly those are the relationships that I feel are very strong, and I see them flourish with attention that I really never got.
That I am so sorry you never got that because without mentoring, how can you get a foothold up? And
Did you have a mentor?
I had a lot of mentors. It was incredible. My first mentor, I think, was the critic and the writer Carolyn C, who
Wow,
yeah,
that's pretty good.
she was incredible. I
Yeah,
met her at a party and I was really nervous. And she said, "You're nervous. Let me introduce you to people." And she
yes,
took me around and introduced me to people. And she
yeah,
kept up mentoring to me. She wrote me and she said, "When you have your next book, send it to me. I'll
yeah,
review it." And she did. And she gave me really invaluable advice, which I think any writer out there should take. She said, every week, write a nice note to a writer you like. Don't ask for
lovely.
anything. Just write a nice note. And she said, don't put it in. We didn't have email then when she said that, but she said, just write a nice handwritten note.
Yeah,
And I've done that. And that is how I got to know John Irving
yeah,
because I wrote him. He actually wrote me back and said, I read your letter twice looking for the ask, and there was no ask. And
yeah.
that is why. So, you know what? Readers, writers, reach out. Tell
Yeah,
writers you love.
that's a
Yep.
great anecdote about Carolyn C. As you were telling that to me, I had this thought, maybe I didn't find a mentor because I wasn't available to it.
Well, it might be that. It might be that too. It's sort of like also like Anne Lamont, she was my fairy godmother. And that came about because this was a zillion years ago, and I had just had a terrible late term miscarriage.
Yeah.
And people
Ooh.
were saying all sorts of stupid things like,
Yeah.
well, you can have another, and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was laying in bed devastated, and I got it in my head. I bet Anne and Lamont would understand. I wrote her a note saying, look, you don't have to write me back. This happened, and I just felt you would understand. And I just writing this note made me feel better. And she called me.
Wow.
She called me and she mentored me. My very first tour,
Yeah.
she interviewed me at a bookstore in California. And of course, it was packed for
Yeah.
people who wanted to see her, not me. But that was just an incredibly
Yeah. That's
wonderful
fabulous.
thing to do. It's fabulous. It's sort of been, if you reach out to writers in a genuine, there we go back to authenticity, they will respond.
Yeah.
They will
Oh, that's for
respond.
sure. I mean, I joined the kind of writing club so late in life, and I have found you, and you're at the top of the list, that, other writers really do step in and take care of you. And that is wonderful. I didn't know what I was doing. And, I'm still stumbling around, but the comradeship that I have felt since making the decision to be a full-time writer has
Right.
been fantastic. It really
It
has.
is it is fantastic. That's sort of why the whole Twitter thing is bothering me so much, because there's
Yeah.
so many Reddit on Twitter. I've had, one day I put out, I don't know how to do a dual timeline. Can somebody help? I got thousands of
Yeah.
responses, including the best
Fantastic.
advice I ever got from Celestine,
Yeah.
so who I did not know.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about you and your editor. You're a superlative editor. I have seen the editing work that you do, and I'm hiring you for my next book.
I
You're
am a
someone
good editor.
someone who writes out 10-page single-spaced roadmaps complete with questions and suggestions for revising. And what I love is that you do it with both a writer's eye and a reader's eye. And wait, and
Thank
speaking of
you.
readers, I just want to say everyone should go out and buy Carrie the Dog, now in paperback, and Steph's first book, The Next, which is wonderful too. Okay, so tell us about how you do this, how you approach editing. What do you look for? What kinds of things are you questioning?
I mean, editing for me is a little bit magical. I really do hear it inside. I mean, I don't always talk about, but I've talked about, when I read, I feel that I am giving permission for another voice to come inside my head. And sometimes,
That's a great phrase.
yeah, sometimes that voice gets full access, and sometimes it takes a little longer. And sometimes I just don't want it in my head. It's just not resonating. It doesn't even matter if it's good writing or bad writing, or it's just not a voice that I can take in and absorb. And so when I read as an editor, that's what I'm looking for, the instant and fluid permission for that voice to be in my head. And then as I go along, I notice places where the voice falters. So that's kind of how I start, with tone and voice. And then, I get very deeply involved in editing and working closely with the writer. And, I love that. And I've had, some success at it. So it's definitely a part of my writing practice now, because now when I write, I'm more, I was going to use the word critical, but it's not critical. I'm paying closer attention to how I write, because I've learned to pay attention to how other people write.
Yes.
It's a little bit of peeking behind a curtain when you edit. You see, what the writer is doing, and you see the mechanics of it. And now I understand, as a writer myself, that some things are, I'll use the word hacks, but sometimes you can elide time. And there are many little tricks that really great writers use to move a story along or to change a tone or a pace.
Tell us some of those hacks. I want to know. How do you move a story
I'll
along?
tell you offline. It's too boring.
Okay.
It's kind of boring.
So what is the best writing advice you can give readers out there and writers out there? And what's the
Well, the
worst?
best writing advice I ever got was I was in a writing workshop. You know, I started writing the next at, I think I was 57 years old, and the book it was my debut novel, got published when I was 60, and Carrie the Dog was published when I was 65, and I'm 66 now, working on number 3, but I was tiptoeing into writing. And so I took a course at the Writers Studio, downtown New York City, and the teacher, whose name I don't even remember, I'd have to look it up. The first thing he said to the class was, "Stop worrying about the New Yorker."
Oh, I love that. I think I know that story.
Yeah, and it really was kind of, very freeing. And the other thing that I've learned that I tell my clients is, it's just you and the screen. Just you and the screen. You don't have to share it. You don't have to craft it for an audience. You just have to write it.
I think Dan Sean also said something about that, where I think he was saying, I've never been in the New Yorker, and here I am. And he said, but I also noticed that when I was first starting out, all the people who are like the big deal writers, he said a lot of them faded away. And that is something that happens. Being a writer with a flavor of the month book is very different than being a career writer, where you keep moving on and on and on.
Right.
So I would like to ask you, where do you think that publishing is going to continue to be alive, and that people will always need stories? And do you have any idea of what could be a new model for publishing and for writers? Because it feels like we're all sort of floundering. I don't know which one is right. Well, whatever.
I also make that same mistake between floundering and foundering.
Yeah, what is it?
I don't know. I don't have I can't invent a new model for publishing. I do think that one of the issues and major challenges is how time intensive it is to get a book out.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a problem in our new world. You can't take 18 months from acceptance to publication. That's just nuts. And so they're going to have to figure that out. But I don't think we're ever going to run out of needing to hear stories.
Right. I don't either, especially and we've got a great question from, how has your writing process changed? Thank you for the question.
Well, I have, my writing process has changed. I've gotten much more, I don't outline. I'm not an outliner, but on the other hand, I'm not just flying by the seat of my pants, what writers call a pantser. I am not a pantser, and I'm not an outliner, but I am a project planner. So I do plan out with a big bulletin board and notebooks where I'm going and what I'm doing. I make timelines. I work a lot around the actual writing. So I have gotten better at doing that and more committed to the prep. When you're a chef, prep is, 40%
everything
of your game, right? And so I have applied that kind of same percentage to my writing, and I've really stuck with it. In the beginning, I thought I was doing everything wrong, but the more I read craft books about how other writers do it, the more I realized that the issues and challenges I was hitting were not a Stephanie problem, they were a writer problem. And there were ways to manage through those challenges. It wasn't just a mysterious process. So I think my writing has changed, where I've gotten much more confident about figuring out the prep and the process.
What craft books do you like?
Oh God, I have a million. I think the Stephen King book is fantastic.
Okay.
I like that other guy, the War of Art, Stephen Presser.
Oh, I don't
Pressfield,
know that one.
Stephen
Okay.
Pressfield, called The War of Art. A very skinny little tiny book that really changed my perception of things. Talks a lot about the internal editor. Because when I first started writing, I could never get off a page because I was so busy perfecting.
Right, right. You can't do that. Don't do that. That'll come
Yeah, you
later.
can't do that because you'll never, I started to really understand what they mean by a first draft. And again, that goes back to my comment about it's just you and the page.
Right, right.
It does not have to be perfect. The other piece of advice is from Stephen King, which is stop at the end of your day, stop in a place where you know absolutely where you're going to pick it up tomorrow.
Right. That's I think Hemingway also said that.
That is
That's brilliant advice.
It's such a little tiny, easy thing to do, and it helps. So you're not standing there staring the next day thinking, well, where am I going with this now?
Right. And you want to sit down again. That's where
Yeah, and you pick it up in the flow.
it's sort of like what you were talking about before about the voice. If I have the voice of a character in my head, I can't wait to have them talk
Yes,
more and
same
tell
here.
me more.
Same
It's
here.
just, I'm excited to sit down. But if I don't, then it's who is this person
And
and why am I writing
do
this?
you get surprised at
Yeah,
what happens?
yeah,
I do too. I'm
yeah,
often
I
surprised at
do.
the turns the book takes.
Yeah, but I never get surprised until I'm in that. I have to
Yeah,
be in the voice. I have to sort of be in the zone.
yeah,
If I'm still working on outlining things, it's sort of like a different
yes,
state of being. So I wanted to ask you, do you know your endings?
yes,
You do. Yeah, I do too.
yeah,
Sometimes they
always.
change, but I feel like that's almost a kind of outline where you're working towards it. Like a lot of times you can think if someone ends up an alcoholic at the end of the book, is how did they get there? And you
Yeah.
can sort of try to backtrack.
Actually, that's it's interesting that you say that, and I so confidently said, "Oh yes, I always know my endings." In Carrie the Dog, I submit the manuscript I submitted and was accepted by Algonquin had a different ending, and I went back. As you know, my editor retired, and in the interim, I went back and changed the ending.
Oh, tell us what the first ending was and what the
The
revised one
first
was. Just people
ending
will want
had
to know.
was much more tied up in a bow. The brother and sister in question end up reconciling. I'm not giving away anything super,
Right. No, it's fine.
but but that felt too neat to me. And I don't think when you're in your 60s, you just shrug off all the pain of the past and trauma
No.
and live happily ever after. So I went back and changed it so that it's much more ambiguous.
I love that. Yeah, and the ending was perfect. The ending was perfect. And that usually will happen. I try to do the linchpins at the beginning and the end. And as soon as the book is over, I have to change both of them, but subtly.
Yes,
Subtly.
yes,
Okay.
subtly.
Bo, do we have any last questions? What are you reading right now?
Ooh, I'm reading. Wait, I forget the name of it. Hang on. Oh yeah, I'm reading
Okay, well, she goes,
Horse by Geraldine Brooks.
oh, great. What kind does your reading change as you're writing? Because there's certain books I can't read when
Sure.
I'm writing.
Yeah, I mean, I always wonder why I'm enamored with historical fiction, really good literary historical fiction, Hilary Mantel, Maggie O'Farrell and Geraldine Brooks, but I don't write that. And I wonder if
That's
I had
interesting.
started earlier in on this career path, if I would have gone in that direction.
You still might. You still might. Like, who knows? That's the great thing about your work in that it's like the first book was the next was very much a thriller and a ghost story of
Yeah, ghost
sorts.
story.
And Carrie the Dog is this profound, deep, moving book about
Almost like a
ourselves and
coming of
art.
age story, but
Yeah,
old.
yeah,
Coming
yeah.
of age for old people.
Well, I want to tell everybody out there again, I want to show the book, Carrie the Dog, the fantastic purple cover, bookshop.org. We love it at Mighty Place, but you can also walk down to your favorite indie bookstore and
Absolutely.
order it for your friends. It's a truly wonderful book that would make a fantastic holiday gift. Um, I also want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank our fabulous host and producer, Bo Ellis. And most of all, I want to thank Stephanie Gangi for joining us on LitFic. She's just fabulous. Thank you so much, Steph. We
Thank you,
really,
Caroline,
really
and thank you,
appreciate it.
Bo.
And we'll see you all next time. Okay, so